This conference will now be recorded.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here at the Spring Family Recovery Conference. My name is Patty Metclaf, and I'm the Executive Director of Faces and Voices of Recovery. And today, my session is going to focus on sharing our stories of recovery, recovery community messaging, and how families can use their story to impact policy and sharing the power and proof that recovery is possible for individuals and family members. So I am a woman in long-term recovery, and for me, that means I haven't used alcohol or drugs in over 29 years. And I share that because my recovery has made it possible for me to do things I never would have imagined, to become a mom, a grandmother, a productive citizen in my community, and certainly my recovery has supported me in being where I am today here with you with the National Recovery Movement at Faces and Voices of Recovery. So I'm going to jump right into our message training. This is a training that we created about 10 years ago to help the recovery community, people in recovery, family members, and friends learn how to use their stories in a positive way to talk about solutions and to help others find long-term recovery. So this a little bit more about Faces and Voices. We're based in Washington, D.C. We began in 2001, and we formed to have a powerful voice of mobilizing the millions of Americans in recovery. Our goal is to change the public perception of the negative stigma that is attached to addiction and recovery. And we do that by mobilizing people like you, family members, friends, allies across the nation and internationally now with chapters and affiliates around the world. So we work to promote effective public policy in Washington, D.C. and across all of the 50 states across the nation. So where our real focus is on the solution, letting people know that recovery works and is making life better for over 23 million Americans, and raising the profile of the National Recovery Movement. We also have local recovery advocacy chapters, recovery community organizations across the nation, as well as a number of affiliates that support our mission. So our sole mission is to bring the power and proof of recovery to everyone in America. So letting everyone know and to celebrate the solution, which is to help people who have been affected by substance use disorders to become part of this solution and demonstrate that recovery is a reality for millions of Americans. So who is the recovery community? Who makes up the recovery community? We consider the recovery community people in recovery from substance use disorders, their family members, their friends, and allies. So allies are organizations and individuals that work in prevention, treatment, recovery support, law enforcement, the healthcare industry, our lawmakers, policymakers. They're all our allies. But our real target is to provide skills, talking points, solutions for people in recovery to be part of this movement. We start with our recovery historian and author, William White. He's the author of Slaying the Dragon, and more recently, Let's Go Make Some History, the recovery advocacy movement. So Bill shares with us his message of hope, which is that many of us have carried the message of recovery. Many of us have carried this message of recovery and hope on a one-to-one basis. But the new recovery movement calls upon us to carry that message of hope to whole communities and the whole culture. So not just within our recovery groups and our personal recovery meetings, but to recover out loud and share our messages and to let people know that there are many pathways of recovery, not just one pathway of recovery, but this new recovery movement celebrates the many, many pathways of recovery. So we were formed to address key problems, and our messaging can help us with that. The real problem is that policymakers don't know about the recovery, about the reality of recovery. They are learning. We are working hard to educate members of Congress. There is now more than ever attention focused to recovery and recovery support services, and the fact that millions of people can and do recover from substance use disorders. And we also focus on the problem that there are not as many opportunities as needed for people to achieve long-term recovery through effective treatment and recovery support services. So that's a key problem that we're working to address. And by learning how to talk about this problem and also the solution, we can educate policymakers and the general public. Our research has shown us that the general public believes that when you hear the word recovery, that people are still struggling, that they're not thriving in recovery, and that we're living productive lives in communities as teachers, coaches, lawmakers, doctors, everyday people across all communities. There are people in recovery. So the other problem that we're addressing is that more effective treatment. So what's effective? What are the effective recovery support services that are needed? We know now that through recovery support services across the nation at recovery community organizations and recovery housing providers, collegiate recovery programs, recovery high schools, alternative peer groups, there are lots of solutions. And many of them are delivered through peer-to-peer support. So peer recovery support specialists and recovery coaches. The problem is that there is not enough, and there is not enough stable funding sources for these for recovery support services. And also discriminatory policies. So policies that are created out of stigma that lead to discriminatory practices, policies that keep people from finding employment, housing, education, and healthcare. We're now, we have been addressing public discriminatory policies since Faces and Voices began in 2001, and there are many organizations out there that are doing this on a local level and also on the national level to make sure that people have the right to recover from substance use disorders. So these are some of the key problems that the messaging can address when you share your story as an individual in recovery or as a family member. And we'll talk more about what that looks like in a moment. So the solution is to put a face and a voice on recovery so that we can break those misperceptions and change those attitudes and end the stigma so often faced by people experiencing substance use disorders as well as family members. Stigma is now the number one reason why people are not accessing treatment. They have a fear of somebody finding out, whether it be a family member, their insurance company, their employer, the court system. But when we break down that stigma and eliminate the stigma and let everyone know that substance use disorders is a chronic but treatable health condition, not a moral issue and not a crime, more people will seek treatment for their substance use disorders. So we need to break down those misperceptions, and messaging can help with that. Also, to speak in a unified voice by building a strong national recovery movement, which is organized at the local level with family groups, family advocacy groups, as well as recovery community organizations, and they are located in communities across the nation, as well as on the national organizations. Some are statewide, some are in small communities, but all of these organizations, and so many of them have grown over these years. Most recently, a lot of family member groups, and all working towards the same thing, is to help save lives and end the discriminatory policies, and to put a face and a voice on what recovery looks like for individuals and families. So these groups are doing several things. One, they're educating the public. Two, they're advocating for policies. And three, they're providing peer-based recovery support services. And many of these organizations are providing a space or an opportunity and inclusive of family voices and family support groups and family advocacy groups that are working together with other organizations in their communities. So channeling all of that into key messages and speaking together as a unified voice builds the stronger national recovery movement. So let's go to one of the reasons why this messaging was developed over 10 years ago, when Faces and Voices of Recovery had first been talking out loud, recovering out loud. People were coming out and talking about their recovery in a public way. We were faced with challenges from the 12-step traditions, which often many of the people in the recovery advocacy movement may have come from that particular pathway. I myself have, but I know that there were a lot of people, and still are, that say that how can you speak out publicly? You can't break anonymity of the 12-step groups. And so we created this brochure, which is available online at on our website, called Advocacy with Anonymity. And how do we stand up for our rights while honoring the anonymity tradition of 12-step groups? Well, there are family 12-step groups as well, and there and those for individuals. There are many different types of 12-step groups, all with traditions 11 and 12, which deal with speaking publicly about recovery. So those traditions talk about not violating somebody's anonymity, or the fact that they're in a 12-step program, or that they're in the meeting that you are attending. So that makes perfect sense, that we would not speak publicly about someone else and their pathway or their participation in a 12-step group, to honor that tradition. However, people can speak out publicly about their own recovery to educate others, to educate them about and outside of their 12-step groups about, and they have the right to speak out. And this brochure, Advocacy with Anonymity, talks a lot about that. And you'll find that we're not anonymous anymore. We don't need to be anonymous regarding our recovery, and that this is the way that we and other groups facing other health conditions do speak out and are not ashamed of talking about their recovery. So it is not a violation of the 12-step traditions to be sharing your message publicly, and it's just an important part of the messaging training that we talk about that, so that people who have any concerns understand that the anonymity in 12-step groups is really based on protecting the confidentiality, or the fact that an individual is in a 12-step program, and what they say in those groups remains in those groups, but does not prevent people from speaking out about their recovery status. And so that's key part of our message training. By the way, I'm doing a very abbreviated version of our of our messaging training, so you won't see all of the details of what we do in the actual messaging training now here in this presentation, but you can find out more on our website or with the full training. So when we're talking about creating a message, who are we talking to? Well, sometimes it's our other family members. It might be one-on-one. It might be with our friends and our neighbors who are asking, how are you doing? How is your family doing? And or we're telling them because we want them to know what we're experiencing and to break down that stigma and to talk about our family's history or experience with substance use disorders, just like we would with any other health condition. So talking with neighbors, coworkers, public officials, there's always opportunities, and looking for that opportunity, taking the opportunity when it presents itself is really important in a way that you can use your message to make a difference. And so sometimes we talk about, if you only had 3 minutes in the hallway with the mayor or somebody on a city council, and they're working on issues around substance use disorders in their community, how do you refine your message in a very succinct way so that you can talk about it from your personal experience without, and get the message across in a very clear way? So how do we do that? Let's see. We have effective messaging strategies. We use our credible experience. You all have your personal experiences. Why you're here on this family recovery conference is because you've experienced substance use disorders in your family. So we use and so you are credible. You have your own personal experience, and that's the most important part of a message. So it makes it personal, and it adds credibility to it, and it breaks down any misperceptions so that people who say, oh, that's just those people, they really do get it. They're like, now they understand. You're talking to them from your own experience, so they could put a face and a voice on this and see that it is impacting their friends and family and neighbors, and what you can do, and likely they know somebody as well. So you talk about the recovery experience, not our addiction experience. So when you only have a short period of time and you want to get your point across, what I talk about and what we train people in our messaging trainings to talk about is, what were the solutions? What worked for you? What was something that made a difference in your life? So I might say, I'm a person in long-term recovery, and that for me, that means I haven't used alcohol or drugs in 29 years. And what that looks like for me is now I'm a taxpayer, I'm a voter, I can help others in my community, I can volunteer. I got my recovery because I found my recovery because there were caring individuals in my life. My mother, my school guidance counselor, my doctor, the treatment professionals, all of whom made a difference in my life. And if those services weren't there, such as the school substance use disorder counselors, those that are working with students. In my recovery, I began at early age with treatment at 17 years old, and I had school people at school. I had my family. I had my doctor, my personal physician, and my treatment provider that I was seeing, all working together to help me. And so that's what made a difference for me. I also began finding my peers of my age that were also participating in 12-step groups. So those are the things that I would talk about as a pathway, or those are the pieces of recovery that made a difference for me. And so when we talk about our story, it's sometimes it can be easy to go down that path of the devastation of addiction, the challenges that we faced, and the types of substances that we used, or the criminal activity that we were involved with, all of those things that were part of the addiction story. But that's not what we focus on when we create a positive message. We focus on what were the pieces of that were available to us that helped us in our recovery. So we tell our recovery story, not our addiction story. And we know how to use these messages in different situations. So whether it's like oftentimes you hear about NIMBY, not in my backyard, right? It happens in communities when you hear they're moving, they want to start a recovery residence, in a neighborhood, and the city council and the neighbors are all saying, whoa, we can't have that here. And so we use our messages and our stories to say, look, we're helping people in recovery. These are people that are living in recovery. And for me, that looks like going to work, helping others, keeping my yard clean, taking care of my bills, getting involved with some activities, sober softball leagues, all those things that are positive. And so we try to use our message in positive ways, no matter what situation we're in. So that's the example of like a situation that's a policy level. So including establishing new programs in a community. How can we come together to share our messages as family members, friends, allies of the recovery community, to say, this is what it meant for me and my son when he was in a recovery residence, a sober living home, and this is what helped, and this is why we want you to allow this in the zoning in this community, or making support groups available in a local community. All of the things that you could do when you're participating, either actively on social media, or if you're on a council, a community coalition, or places where you can make a difference, to share your story and what worked for you and your family member. So we do all of this to make it possible for more individuals, families, and communities to heal and to get well and to overcome all of the challenges that we're facing now with substance use disorders in our own communities. So let's talk about the message. There's no one way, there's no one size fits all, although we're going to provide some guidelines, but you want to personalize it so that it makes the most sense for you. You can develop it in different ways, and I'm going to walk through a little the way that Faces and Voices has developed the message training. And there are now tens of thousands of people across the country using this messaging, so it's becoming more useful. And as we hear more people using similar messaging, talking to they're talking in Congress, telling their story, talking to policymakers, also on the state and local level. So there's no one size fits all. It could be adapted to different groups. People using medication for their recovery, family members who have lost loved ones to addiction, and young people in recovery, as well as their friends and family. Individuals with using a harm reduction approach, people who are using drugs that have a story to tell about trying to make a difference for their peers in their community as well. So what works? What helps people stay safe? What helps people on their pathway to recovery? What helps people find and maintain wellness activities? And by finding your own voice, you'll use these messages as a guide, no matter where you are and who you're talking to. So when we personalize the message, this is how we do it with a person in recovery. So I'm also going to talk about the message, the recommended message for a family member in recovery. But the way it works, as I've demonstrated, is, starting out with, I'm a person in long-term recovery. Now, why do we say that? Because we use person-first language. I'm a person first. And just like your loved ones are people, your sons, daughters, your parents, your relatives, they're people first. They are a student, they're an employee, they're a son, a daughter, they're a person with a substance use disorder. So we always use the person first language. And when we talk about long-term recovery, there's no set defined length of time. It's all individualized. So you can, some people are saying, we'll say, I'm a person in sustained recovery, which means that sustained, meaning they're not going to put a length of time on it. They're just saying, I've been in recovery from substance use disorder. So, and we follow it up with what that means to you, because not all recovery looks the same, And there's no one definition that we all have to go by when we're talking about recovery. So it's very personal. It's personalizing the message. So for here, we say, I'm a person in long-term recovery, which to me means I have not used alcohol or drugs for X number of years. Or you could say since 1989. And sustained recovery has given me new hope and stability. I've been able to create a better life for myself, for my family, and for my community. And I'm speaking out, I'm sharing this with you today so that others will have the opportunity to achieve recovery. So that's the kind of talking points that set you up for them understanding, whoever you're talking to understand why you're doing what you're doing, why you're talking about this right now. And then if you could follow that up with what you're there for on that day. So if in this example you're there at the state cap or the U.S. Capitol and you're there to talk to your members of Congress, you would say, I'm here because I'm advocating for these 3 key legislative priorities this year in this Congress. And this is why we're coming to you to speak with you about what's going on in our community in Chicago and what's happening. But they start out by identifying themselves so that the person you're talking with, in this case, a staff person, a legislative staff person on Capitol Hill, they would want to know why you're there and why it's personal to you and that you're a person in their community and that you're a constituent of the person the office that you're visiting. So anyway, this messaging is pretty simple and pretty consistent, and it will look different for everyone. But it helps us to put a little bit of structure around sharing our stories and recovery messaging. So when we talk about family members, we would look at, here's some other way to talk about recovery. And these are family members in Colorado. And they say, and this is a mom, a daughter in recovery. And the way that they talk about it is they say, my family and I are in sustained recovery, which means that my daughter hasn't used alcohol or drugs for X number of years. We've become healthier together. We're enjoying our family life in our home. And sustained recovery has given me and my family new purpose and a hope for the future. I want to make it possible for others to do the same. So it flows, it makes sense. If it doesn't to you, change it, move it around a little bit. If your child is not in sustained recovery, but you are because you've experienced the family recovery process yourself as an individual who has experienced what it's like to have a family member struggling with substance use disorders, but you're finding your own pathway to health and healing and wellness, and you're part of the solution, then you can change the language around, but you could say, I am a family member in recovery from my daughter or my son's substance use disorder. I am a family member who has experienced the loss of a child due to their substance use disorder. And in my recovery process, I have become a healthier person, and I am here to advocate for the services that are needed to help other families overcome the challenges of addiction and substance use disorders. And so you can change it around, use your own language. I'm going to share with you an example next of Pam Lenhart's family recovery story. So Pam shared this after taking the messaging training, and she says, my name is Pam, and I'm an advocate and ally for the recovery community and a person in recovery from the effects of substance use has had on my family. What that means to me is when living with someone who is affected by substance use disorder, I can work my own path of recovery, doing my own work to become healthy and well, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. It means that regardless of the circumstances around me, I can change. Pam says, for recovery for me means that I don't have to be consumed by other people's negative choices. It means that I can show up every day without anxiety and fear. It means that I will be present for my family, my friends, and my community. And for me, it means that I will use my voice to share our family's experiences without shame. Most importantly, it means that every day when I wake up, I choose hope, and I will help to spread that hope to other families affected by substance use disorder. So, as you can see, there's not one size fits all. You don't have to go exactly around the script, but this is one way that Pam, who has become a leader in the family recovery advocacy movement, just like many of you, have created your own messaging. So take some time to think about it, think it through, write it out, and practice it with your family, your friends, and see how it feels. And don't worry, it's your story. You could do it any way you want, and you can't make any mistakes. It's all your own. So it's just a way, this is a way to give you kind of the information about what works, what's effective, and how we can use our messaging to make it become part of the solution. So we're going to talk about what's not in the message. If you noticed in Pam's message or in the messaging for a person in recovery, what you don't see is, I'm an addict or I'm an alcoholic. Why? Because we are more than that. We are not a label. There's no need to label your child or any other person in your family or ourselves. What we say is, I'm a person with a substance use disorder, or I am a person in recovery from alcohol or drug addiction. Or you can say, my child is recovering, oops, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I moved too quick. I'm going to move on to the next slide where it tells us about what words to avoid and why. So we avoid the word addict. It's just like if I had a child with autism, I would say I have a child with autism. I wouldn't say I have a autistic, a person who is autistic. I wouldn't be saying a diabetic. I would be saying a person with diabetes. We put the person first language. We also know that this in the medical community, using the word addict has led to stigma and misperceptions of people. And so now when we use the term that is the medical diagnosis of substance use disorder, the medical community is responding with a more favorable, positive response to help people with their medical condition. And so the same with the word alcoholic. We use the person with an alcohol use disorder. Instead of when we avoid the words drug problem or drug habit and use substance use disorder. That's what it is. And then we move away from the word abuse. Abuse is a negative word. It's often related to things like child abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, and it implies that the person is intentionally abusing something or someone. So we changed the words to drug misuse or substance use or substance misuse or harmful use. And rather than calling somebody a drug abuser, again, we call them a person with a substance use disorder. Now, we often also hear about the word clean, like I've been clean for X number of years. And I understand that that's a term that's often used within the 12-step community, mostly with people who have been in recovery from drug use or substance use disorder. However, it also kind of it implies that the person is not dirty, as in actively using. So we try to move away from the words clean or dirty and say actively using or not actively using. So it's just the stigma can be reduced by using the appropriate language. And oftentimes we also see with a negative or positive drug test, they will say clean or dirty, and the actual terms are testing negative for substance use or testing positive for substance use. So those are some ways we can shift our language as well to imply more of that this is a medical condition, and these are testing. Testing is done just like any other medical condition, and so moving away from the clean and dirty is focuses on much more positive language. And again, rather than saying former or reformed, addict or alcoholic, we talk about it ourselves as a person in recovery or person in long-term recovery. And more recently, with the treatment, many treatments that are now available for opioid use disorder, we refer to it as medication-assisted recovery. That medication is a treatment that is being used to treat the substance use disorder, rather than talking about opioid replacement therapy or methadone maintenance. Moving away from terms that imply that this is that it's not a routine treatment that is used for recovery from opioid addiction. So there's a lot of stuff in there that we can go into a lot more. I think the most important point that I want to talk about is just moving away from that word addict. So often we can stigmatize our children or our loved ones by saying that this is a person that my child is an addict, or my father is an addict, or my mother is an alcoholic. Those type of things are very, could imply judgment or moral issue, and we need to move away from that to let people know that this is a chronic yet treatable health condition, and similar to other medical illnesses, medical diseases, we talk about person-first language. So moving on to the next slide, let's see. So when do you use this message? You use these messages when you're talking to people, but also when you're writing in articles, newsletters, blogs. You want to make sure that, and especially when we see the media using inappropriate language, or language that is, or messages that are, we want to make sure that we're letting them know what we've learned, what's best practice around talking, and what messages are useful and what are not. So the messages can be used in a number of ways, also to prepare for interviews. So if you know you're going to be meeting with someone as a family member, as somebody with the press, to sit down and think about your messaging first. And it's so often when we're talking about something that we're so passionate about, that has impacted us personally, to go deep into the story of active addiction, and rather than talking about recovery, and oftentimes using terms that we're not even aware that are perpetuating the stigma, essentially. So going back to Bill White, Bill shares with us that words have immense power to wound or to heal. So the right words can catalyze personal transformation and offer invitations to citizenship and community service. However, the wrong words can stigmatize and disempower individuals and entire communities. So Bill has provided us with many wise words over the years, and this is something that really has helped us understand that words can wound us. They can hurt individuals. They can hurt people who are trying to get well. They can also have immense healing power by using the right words and understanding substance use disorder as the health condition that it is, versus the stigmatizing language that has often been used. So, also Don Koyas of Wellbriety and White Bison. Don Koyas is the founder of White Bison. traditional Native American healing practices and in recovery. And Dawn shares with us that words are important. Words are important. If you want to care for something, you call it a flower. And if you want to kill something, you call it a weed. So it makes lots of sense to me. I hope it makes sense to you. So the language that we use in our recovery messaging, in our family messaging, should be focused on positive and healing words. So you can find out more about recovery messaging and resources from Faces and Voices of Recovery on the Faces and Voices of Recovery website. And also we have question and answer tip sheets available with this training, and a DVD to help you to maybe see some interviews that were used as models and examples by people in recovery, family members and friends, and also the brochure that's available as well on our website. So I hope that you all have learned a little bit about the messaging that we use, why it's important, how the words we can use can heal and become part of the solution to recovery, and helping families experience the joy of recovery, as well as being able to share and make a difference in the policy area around what the solution is. There are many solutions out there in your state and local community. You know best about what's needed and what would be most effective based on your experience. So using the messaging, using your experience, helping people understand that there are 23 million Americans in recovery, and that you as family members are part of the recovery movement. So good luck in your journey, and thank you for listening to me and sharing this time with me. So goodbye.